Today is August the 30th, 1997. We're in Columbus, Ohio at the 12th Armored Division reunion, the 51st one. My name is Charlie Henson, and this morning I am interviewing Richard Dick Keep, and he goes by Dick. Okay, thanks for coming and talking to us today. First of all, give me your name, where you were born, and your date of birth.
Well, I'm Richard Keep, and I was born in Sanborn, Minnesota on September 28th, 1924.
Tell me about your mother and father, where they came from, and what they did for a living.
Well, my folks were farmers. One came from Minnesota and one came from Iowa. My father left to get a job about 16, 17 years old and headed for Minnesota to work in the wheat fields and oat fields and whatever, and run a thrashing machine, and met my mother, and they lived in Minnesota for a short time and then came back to Iowa, where they lived on their farm for 67 years. They were married. And
give me their names.
Myrtle and Richard.
Okay. What was her name?
Pint. Her Pint, P-I-N-T. That's not the way but that's the way it was pronounced. Okay. That's a German name. And
did you have brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have 3 brothers.
Okay, give me their names in the order of y'all's birth.
Well, first one is Jack, and then Gene and Bob. And that's they're all still living. And I was the oldest. So, but anyway, we had a pretty good life, so. And the 2 youngest ones, well, I'll take that back. The youngest one, he was not in the service because of the age. And the next one was just in during right after the Korean. And the one next to me was during the Korean War. But now he didn't go, he was in Germany, he was assigned in Germany. So.
Tell me about what was important to your mom and dad? What was important to teach you boys?
Well, I guess just to love life. That was basically it. And you know, we all get along, and there's never been any conflict in the family like there is some families. You know, there's never been any jealousy or whatever. So. And the farm has been in the family for like 150 years, and it's not a big farm, but we still own it just as brothers, but we don't farm it. We let somebody else do that. But none of us wanted, from the money angle, we didn't want to sell it. We just wanted, nobody knows why we want to keep it. It's just one of those things in the family. And so this is about the 4th generation has actually lived on that farm. So, yeah, we just had a pretty good life.
Tell me about your school days. Get me from elementary up to graduation in high school and what you like to do.
Well, I started school the first year in Minnesota, and then we moved to Iowa, and then I went to a little country school. And when I got out of the 8th grade, why, us country kids had to go to town to get smart, I guess. But they had to give us, they had what they called an 8th grade test to see whether you could come to high school. And then I graduated from high school there, and my big thing, I suppose, in high school was sports, baseball. And so I pitched baseball for every game for 4 years in high school. So that was basically my curricular activities as far as or extra. And then I went to a business school in a town where I live now, which is about 30 miles from the farm. And when I was drafted, I had already had a letter saying that where do I want a job for like like in the civil service, but I could take shorthand. And I suppose shorthand is what kept me out of D-Day going, because then I was drafted and I went to Fort Riley, Kansas, which is a replacement training center.
Give me the date of this, I
was drafted in August of 43.
And you were what age at that?
18.
You were 18?
Yeah.
So tell me about basic training and where that occurred.
Well, it was at Fort Riley, and they told us when they put us in this, well, it was a group a little bit different, they said, because we were going to be replacements for anybody, and we were supposed to be able to do anything that anybody in the Army could do, no matter what. And they said, when you leave here, there isn't anything you can't do to take somebody's place or whatever, And it was a tough training course because it was hot. So hot in Kansas in August and September. And then just before Christmas, they said we were done. We had, basically 5 months. And then I went to Fort Meade, which is for about 3 weeks or somewhere in there. And then I went to the next, which was Camp Shanks, for about 4 or 5 days. And then what they did, they separated, there was people went to Fort Ord, Camp Hood, but there was 75 of us, and how or why they picked these groups. They took 75 of us and got on this ship, and they put us up in the bow of the ship away from everybody else. I don't think it was because we were bad guys. I think it was just because that's the way it was. And then on the rest of the ship was a infantry division. And then we left New York last of January and went across the North Atlantic in a convoy. The weather was the worst that ever there is in this world. You couldn't go up on top on the deck. And when you did, it was only to go down to eat and hang on a big rope, put your life jacket on. Of course, if you went overboard, there wasn't anywhere, they couldn't have got you anyway. But I felt sorry. We were having a bad time, but I felt sorry for some of the little ships that were escorting us, supposedly to protect us, because they were a lot smaller than we were. And everybody was seasick. But I didn't get seasick, thank heaven. I don't know why. But that was one of the good breaks I got on there, I guess, because you were just wanting some fresh air. You just want to get out of that, because that was a living like you cannot believe. Bunks 5 high, and everybody getting sick. And so the sergeant in charge of our little group said, "You're not getting seasick. I've got a job for you." And I couldn't imagine what that was, but believe it or not, they had to report, like a morning report, every morning to another officer that was in charge of we'll say the whole ship's group of soldiers, and it was clear at the other end of the ship. So I got to go out hanging on the rope to the other end of the ship, which was just a relief to get out, and I'd do that twice a day to report to him that we were all still there. So.
How large was this ship? How many soldiers were on this ship?
I don't know. I can't really recall. It seemed like 3,500 in that one infantry outfit, but there were just 75 of us up there in this. And being in the bow of the ship, that's when you go straight up and straight down. So it was a horrible ride for 14 days. And then we landed in Barry, Wales. In the middle of the night, they put us on a train, and then we went to a little town in England, Glastonbury. And I can remember walking down this street. It was a beautiful morning, and like the 1st of February or right about in there. And we went to a prisoner of war camp that had been for Italian prisoner of wars. And they were all shipped out, and they put us in this little camp to pick us out wherever they wanted us after that. And primitive is just not the word for it, because they lived in Quonset huts, which we did, and
What were the huts made of?
Tin.
Tin.
You know, the rounded Quonset huts. Well, and each end of it they had a stove about yay big. And they said, now for heat, here's 2 buckets. And we have an armed guard down there on this, a pile of coal and a pile of coke. And you start the fire with one, and then the coke gets hotter and supposedly gives you some heat. And then they hand you a mattress cover. And now it said, for a bed, there's a pile of straw over there. You go fill that, and that's what you're going to sleep on. And around this little camp, it had been a city park in this little town with a stone wall, and prior to the prisoner of war deal, but they added glass and barbed wire to the top of that. And the gate that you got in and out of this thing was, well, part of the gate was fastened to a little pub there and that's where you got in and out of the camp, was going through that little gate. But it was a real small, I mean, heavens. I don't suppose there was 2 acres in the whole camp, and that's where they kept a certain amount of these prisoners, and they were shipped to the United States.
There were just the 75 of you in that area? Or
Yes,
were there others?
yes,
Just,
no,
just the 75?
just the 75 of it. And then as time went on, they'd come and pick out a guy maybe to do this or send to some other group. Well, one day they came to me and said, it says on this that you can take shorthand. I said, yeah, I can. So they took me into this little town, which is where the camp was, and they put me like I wasn't really in an office. I'd just go down there every day, and I'd go to these high-level staff meetings, the generals and the whatever that would come into this little town, and I'd take shorthand, and then I'd transcribe it and they would make bulletins out of it to send to the different officers.
Which officers, do you remember any of the men that you took notes for, the generals or anything?
No, I can't. But they had nothing to do with my little group at all. They were a group from some other place. And they would just meet in there, and whenever they had one of these, that's what I would be doing. But it was not an everyday deal. It was just once in a while, you know. And then they put me driving an ambulance between there and Bath, England. And I was doing that. But I was just a kind of a jack of all trades, just waiting on an assignment. And finally, after so long, you can imagine a buck private talking to a captain that he was in charge of a group, and I told him, I said, I got to get out of this. I don't want to take shorthand anymore. I want to get back to a reconnaissance outfit, which is where I had really been intended to go as a replacement. And he said, well, we can make you stay here. And I said, you can't make me take shorthand because I can forget it. Well, back in those days, for an old private to talk to an officer like that, but he was a nice guy. And
What was his name?
I think it was Ramsey, Captain Ramsey. I think that was, but we weren't that good of friends because you don't make friends with, back in those days. Now today it's a little different story, but anyway.
So they just gave you jobs to do around that little town? All of y'all had different kind of jobs?
Yes.
But
Today, so many might go drive a truck. But they were taking 2s, 3s, 4s out of there to send them someplace, different groups. But it seemed like I was just kind of sticking around because they had me doing everything, which fine with me. Well, then finally he told me, he said, well, if you'll stay here, I'll give you a rank that they can't touch you. It's basically a finance, they had a name for it, but anyway, your rank wouldn't be touched by anybody, and it's better paid than you ever thought of. And he said, you'll never hear a shot fired in anger. You'll be right anywhere in England. And I said, let's go the other way. I want to go to a recon outfit. So he said, just hang tough. I'll get you there somewhere.
What in your personality so many people would have loved just to stay like that. What in you made you just want to get out and get away?
I don't really know. I really honestly, but I just could not see myself strapped in, And I could have had a real good rank, but I just didn't want to do it. And so then I kind of got out from under his wing, because he sent me someplace with the idea that I was supposed to go to a recon outfit. Well, then I got in with a group. All of a sudden they come and got me one day and said, well, I'll back up a little bit. Then I was transferred to Tidworth, what they call Tidworth proper, or Tidworth, these fellows talk about Tidworth barracks, but it was actually a permanent post in England for a short time, and I was driving a truck there and a Jeep going here and yon, and finally one day they came and got me, and I was put in an infantry outfit in a little tent city south of Tidworth, and there was 399 AWOL. They'd got people from every detention camp and wherever. And they were going to send them all to an infantry replacement deal over in Europe. And they were all a bunch of, but they needed...
Did you say AWOLs? This was a bunch of AWOLs?
They had been in different detention camps in Pennsylvania. They shipped them over from Pennsylvania, Africa. Italy had one. And they were all brought to this little place and give a little more training. And some of them didn't even know how to load a rifle. That's the truth. They did not. I had to show some of them, because we had about a week or two there, and then they said, all right. But they needed this one man to make 400, just a number, see. So that was me. And they stripped us down to, they had a little pack, like a horseshoe pack, which you never saw in those days, except for some reason they made them do that, and you got everything rolled up in a blanket, and that was all your clothes in this blanket. You made a horseshoe out of it and tied it over your back. So that not one night, they come and got us out of our tents and said, all right, well, you're leaving. So I got on with the group, and we stood out there, and they called my name, and I just stepped up to get on the truck, and the sergeant reached out and said, you don't go. And there it is, like midnight. And I said, what do I do now? And he said, just stand over there. So they loaded the 399 of these people on the trucks, and they left. So he come over to me, and he said, go find you a place to sleep, and I'll come and get you in the morning. We don't know where you're going, but you're going someplace.
What was that like? What was it like knowing that you were with all these guys who couldn't do anything, and then you think you're going to go to war with these guys who can't do anything? Tell me what that was all like.
Well, you don't... I guess I'd been kicked and pushed, and I didn't lead a bad life, but it was frustrating because I never got mail. You hardly ever got mail. There was times I couldn't even write. Couldn't mail it out because you had nobody to censor your, and your pay, you get $10 partial payment. And once in a while, you might get a little more, but they just, because you were never assigned any place. And then then the next morning, he come down, he said, well, come and eat with us, which was the cadre, the personnel that were looking after the camp, which was very few because there were just so many tents. And so he said, well, we don't know yet. Come back at noon, and we'll eat again. Well, I went down at noon, and he said, well, I've got a spot. Be down here at 1 o'clock with your possessions, which was, I could have picked them all up, And then they drove me up to this 12th Armored, and I walk in there, and these people had been together for like 2 or 3 years, and here I am, a complete stranger again, walking in, and some fella had broke his collarbone the night before, or the day before, whatever. And so I was assigned his spot, and that's how I got into the 92nd as a recon. But even then was a bad situation because, you can't say people are cliquish, but finally one guy sort of befriended me, and he said, well, I know you're kind of a stranger, and so he kind of took me, but then even, as time went on, like 2 or 3 weeks, they were giving me every little detail, everything so I decided, well, I've got to do something to be assigned to a vehicle or a job or a whatever. So I wrote a letter to my dad. Well, my dad, he didn't write to me as, because I'd write to my mother, or, it was to the family, but anyway, I said, in this letter, I said, Dad, you was wanting to know about my assignments, because I'd written a letter, probably a month before that, telling that I was going to be assigned to something else, but I'd never got into this. You couldn't say what you were going to do. So I said, you asked if I liked what I was going to be doing and where I was at, this new outfit and whatever. And I said, I don't like it because they don't believe that I can do anything, apparently. And I said, I can do anything as good or better than any of these people, even if they've been trained together. So I said, I know they need a mortar gunner, and I can do that, but they won't even talk about it. About the second day, here come a lieutenant. He said, I understand you can run a mortar. Well, so he has written or read this letter during the censoring business, and I said, yes. And he said, you can also drive a Jeep, can't you? And I said, yeah. He said, you're assigned that Jeep and that mortar. So that's, it was, and then from then on, of course, I was in, and we all became friends and whatever, but it was a real different to be kicked around like that, and I'm sure there was others, but there was people in this other outfit, and thank heavens I didn't stick with them. At 399, that would have been a disaster.
You might not be sitting here today.
Right, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
But
you had told me a few minutes ago before we started that you had 9 areas that you had tested out. I don't know the term.
Well, okay. What this
Explain
is,
that to me, because you're talking about you could do the mortar, you could do the Jeep driving.
Okay, you just had a number, and this number was on it's kind of and we'll say you was a rifleman, we'll say. That was a number, and they could look it up, okay, or if you were a truck driver, or if you was a mortar gunner or a machine gunner or whatever, you had, or if you were, say, a clerk, you had a separate number. Well, I had so many numbers because they would assign me a different number all the time to do this or do that. Well, my final one, I think I had nine different numbers. And So I kept them all confused, I guess, but anyway, it ended up all right, so.
Okay. Where did you catch up with the 12th? At what
This was
point?
at Tidworth Barracks in September.
Oh, so they had not even gone
No,
over?
no, they hadn't gone over yet. Mm-mm. That's how I happened to get, and then it was very shortly after that, then our group left. And just to show you how that goes, being kicked around was a good deal for me in that case, because we got on board the ship to cross the channel. Well, the ship's officers and our officers got to eat with the ship's officers. Well, people don't believe this, but they ate with china and silverware, and they were waited on by, they call them stewards. And so they came to me and said, you go help the ship's stewards look after the officers. Well, it was just another job they thought was a dirty job. Well, it ended up, the rest of them stood in lines out there in this swells and the rain and the whatever, and I got to eat off when they got done, and all I did was just help them take the dishes on and off the table and whatever, and I got to eat the good food and eat off the silverware. While the rest of them were standing out there in line trying to get their mess kits moist and whatever. So that was one of the times that, and I got another break on the ship. I got a toothache. Well, they had it was just like a small closet for a dispensary. So I went down there and this guy said, you need a place to sleep tonight, don't you? He said, sleep right under that operating table. So the rest of them were sleeping out on the deck, and I was in. So it hasn't been all bad, I guess.
Okay. What were your thoughts as y'all went across the channel? Did you think about?
Oh, I didn't. It didn't. I guess I wasn't braver than anybody, but I guess I was just an old farm kid that I really didn't have any fear of anything. I mean, I didn't have any qualms about anything, I guess. I'd just been brought up to look after myself and take advantage of every opportunity that came along, and so that's what I did. And so I don't know, it worked out pretty good, I guess.
Tell me about your first impressions of after landing, and walk me through how y'all got set up and what your specific jobs were.
Well, when we first started out, I was in a little group, and we were guarding a dam in France, and they put us doing different things because they didn't send us right up to the front lines to start with, but that was, we'd done that probably for a week or something like that we'd had to guard this dam, walk up on, because they were afraid that they were going to try and sabotage or blow the dam up, saying that would have flooded a whole big valley down through there. And then we moved up through France, and I'll never forget the rain, mud all the time. And they pitched us in our little pup tents, and we had to dig trenches around them to keep the water from running through. And but after that, why, it was just a kind of a steady old grind to move here, move there, and then we got into the combat business, but I guess that there was a lot of them had it worse than we did, but we had our bad moments too. So,
tell me, describe what a reconnaissance unit did. That all of you in the 92nd were, that was a reconnaissance unit?
Yes.
Okay. Describe how that all worked, because some people aren't going to know this. People listen to this years ahead of us.
Well, what we would do was they'd assign a small group of us, we'll say, to go to an area or drive through to see if we could spot where the Germans were at, what type of firepower they had, or maybe they would send 3 or 4, or say, go get a prisoner, try and capture somebody so we can interrogate them. So there was a few times I got in on that we would sneak up to a town or to a fence row or whatever and sneak up on a German and capture him and bring him back. And that was a lot of it. And we were be assigned to, okay, look after a bridge or spot a bridge and keep it intact. And it was just something new and different every day as far as, but I guess the big thing was the moving and the, you never knew because we were assigned so many different, we were with the 3rd Army for a while, the 7th Army. We were even assigned with the French Moroccans that rode the horses and whatever, to do some scouting for those people. And
Where was that? When y'all were with the French Moroccans? I've not heard that story.
Well, it'd be in southern France. They were assigned to a certain area, and there was one time that we were assigned to do some scouting work for them, But when I'd say a group, all right, you had A, B, C, and D and that would be a small group. A was a certain group under a lieutenant and so many sergeants, and B, well, I just happened to be with D, and it seemed like we got a lot of them crazy little details to do like that. And we never got into a lot of just, well, we got into it plenty, but what I'm saying is it was just not a knockdown, drag out. We were more the sneaky kind, I guess. And so it was very interesting. But we lived a kind of an independent life, because we were just foraged on ourselves. There was a lot of times that and the food and the gasoline and the ammunition and that, a lot of times was short, especially the food. You didn't eat too good. But we made out, I guess, so.
As you looked at the reconnaissance units, would you see them as a kind of a different type of men?
Well, I always thought so, and I'm sure most of them would think that. To me, it was more of a friendly little special group. You weren't with a big group of people, and like in our little group, there was 2 Jeeps and an armored car. Well, then there was another section or another little group. They'd have, but the 12 of us, and sometimes there wasn't 12, but then, and because there was times I had 2 guys, sometimes 1 guy in my Jeep, and but then we done a lot of, you think it is a mechanized, but we done a lot of leaving our vehicles and slugging it out, walking someplace and sneaking someplace and on foot. It wasn't all just driving down the road and shooting at somebody. So, but the cold weather was what was so bad. Oh, and we got so cold. We'd be in a foxhole, we were just talking about this last night. I didn't smoke, but I'd dig a hole back in so you could get about this much of you back in there, and then I'd light a cigarette and put my hands over the cigarette to think that was going to get them warm. And it was so cold. And you walk 1,000,000 miles, but you'd never go anyplace because you'd stand there in that foxhole tromping your feet trying to keep from freezing. But, yeah.
What were the things that you carried on yourself, or did you store a lot of things in there since you had vehicles? What did you carry on yourself? Guns or grenades or what?
You had a very poor sleeping bag because the sleeping bag was so small and loose. In fact, I took 2 army blankets and sewed the 2 army blankets like into an envelope and stuffed them in so you know, if you got a chance to sleep someplace, at least you had some warm because, and then you had a duffel bag, which is, you put your sleeping bag and what clothes you had with you. And of course you had ammunition and then I had the mortar. And of course then you had your own personal weapons. And, but I had 3 of them. You know, you were assigned 1, but most everybody, it all depended upon, like if you'd go out on a walking patrol, we'll say, or after somebody, you took the M1 or the rifle, because that was a good, reliable, distant, and whatever. But if you went into a town at night, you took a, like we called them grease guns, a small submachine gun, or if you were on someplace where you didn't think you were going to get in trouble, you took a carbine. And if we'd go out on our dismounted patrol, you'd always carry a smoke grenade. And a smoke grenade, if they pinned you down someplace, throw 2 or 3 of these out, and get a big smoke going, and then crawl out there. We've done that several times, you know, just cover ourselves with smoke and slip out.
Tell me the closest call that you ever felt you were in.
Well, I'd say the closest call, we were going to, I can't tell you the name of the little town, but anyway, we were going along the road in a column, and the Jeep right ahead of me they were going real slow, and the sniper was off way in a long distance away, and he shot one of the guys, and another one jumped out of the Jeep and broke his leg. When he jumped into a ditch and broke his leg. And I was in a Jeep back, and my canteen cup was laying up here behind me on these duffel bags, and that canteen cup went sailing off there, and he shot this canteen cup when he just missed us. And I told the fellow that I was with, and I said, let's just get out of here, and we just jumped out of the Jeep, and it rolled over and hit a tree and stopped it. And then him and I got in the ditch and laid there. And we laid there and watched them. I think there was 5 guys got hit right there. And there was a lieutenant from another outfit, from E Troop. He come running up there. He wanted to know what the holdup was. And I said, Lieutenant, you better get down. They just got 5 guys, and just then it went splat. And he said, damn, they got the 6th one. Well, they got him right through the arm here. And but that was just one of the deals. And there was another time that they had us. We couldn't see anybody. We couldn't anything. But they got, I think there was like 9 got hit right in that little skirmish, and they brought a tank down to crawl between us and the ditch. So there was about 5 of us crawled up this ditch so we could get out of there, because we couldn't see anybody to shoot at. They was all dug in. But this sniper that shot the canteen cup, we crawled over to a house and took a machine gun and went up into the upstairs. And we knew about right where he was at out in this field, but he was dug into a hole. And somebody got smart enough then that we can't shoot at him with this machine gun, because they got tracers, which every 5th, you know, tell them where we was at in this house. So then they started throwing some airburst, which is the artillery shell goes off up in the air and sends all the shrapnel down. Well, then this sniper, we saw him move way out there, and he had a door, looked like a door, with dirt over it, and he was shooting up this way. When he got panicky when that airburst started, so then the sergeant, he got a lucky shot off when this guy started raising up out of there, and it was way out there in the field. I don't know how, he just got lucky. But there was a lot of little things like that. But I guess one of the things that I remember about it as much as anything, I would more or less, the our little group's interpreter, because I could speak some German. And there was one time the lieutenant come to me and he said, we was in this little village. See, after we got really going, we'd go into a little village and there was no other, maybe the Germans were there that very night before. And this particular time, I guess that sticks with me about as much as anything, to see how the German and the French people survived 2 wars. But the lieutenant come to me and he said, go tell those people to get out of that house over there, and we're going to move into it tonight. And we set up booby traps all around this little village. So I goes over there, and it's a little, small 2-story house, which you don't see too many 2-stories in that particular area, because it was all farming community. And of course they started crying, and little kids and old people and whatever, they thought we was going to tear up their houses. And the one said, well, they'd never seen Americans, and they said, well, I was afraid they'd be shot and this kind of stuff. They'd been led to believe this. Finally, they moved on. I said, well, we're not going to hurt your house or anything like that, because I had the idea that, hey, they're human beings, they're Germans, but so what? They didn't do anything to me. So I treated them like human beings, and so finally they just started moving out, and the lieutenant come to me pretty soon. He said, go tell them people move back in that house. He said, I don't want that house. He said, that's the high point basically in this village, and when you set up a mortar or artillery, you have an aiming post or stick, they call it, and that's what you center on. So he said, we don't want that. You go take that little house over there. And so I went to all these people, and I was a good old diplomat. And I said, well, you've got all these small children and whatever. Why don't you move back into your house? Oh, they was, so glad. And finally, this one old fella, he come to me and he said, how do you learn to speak German? And I said my mother and my grandmother had, when us kids they didn't want us to know what they were talking about, why they would speak in German. And I said, I just picked up a little bit, and I just keep learning more and more, because I wasn't good at it, but I could make them understand and make them speak slow so I could understand what they said. Anyway, this old fella come to me and he asked me all these questions, and he said, well, you're a nice person. You're not like we were told you would be. So he said, come with me. So we go down in their basement, and we walk up to this row of shelves that just built into the wall. And it had 2 or 3 little fruit jars and nothing else. And he reached behind and unhooked this. And that swung on hinges, and there was a room back in this basement, about 10 foot square, I suppose. Well, maybe not quite that big, but anyway, there was cases of eggs. They had chunks of butter. They had loaves of bread. They had rings of sausage and bologna and this, and a rack of wine. They had bottles of wine stuck in here. So he said, for you being such a good soldier, why don't you take, well, I could have taken it all. But they were hiding this from the German army itself, so they could survive. So when I left there, I had 2 bottles of wine in my pockets and a loaf of bread and my helmet full of eggs and butter. And those rings of sausage up my arm, and I went back to the Jeep and I said, we eat good tonight. So we fried fresh eggs and that bologna and butter, and with that bread, and wash it down with wine. So you think you're living like a king, but that's how they survived a lot of that. They were just common, ordinary people. They didn't, in a lot of the little villages, they were just human beings too. So. But I think those are the things that stuck with me. Yeah, I picked as much as anything. To see how they could survive and be good people too.
Sounds like you had more, maybe some more interpersonal relationship. Was that because y'all were reconnaissance and not so big?
I think this is true. I think that it just set us apart, I thought anyway, from a lot of what I've heard other people talk about, you know. We were just a well-knit little group, and everybody knew what everybody's personal likes and dislikes were, and sure, you had some knotheads too, like you do in any formal life, I suppose, but by and large, the little group I was with, we just had some good companionship and
do you know names of those? Do you remember the names of those men, or how many of y'all went clear through the war together?
well, in fact, we just lost about 3 or 4 this last 3 or 4 months, but right upstairs now in our hospitality room is our lieutenant, and
Who's that?
Lieutenant Fig, Carlton Fig. I think he's supposed to be for an interview this afternoon, I think. But there again, the officers were a different breed of cat as far as I'm concerned. They were just like us. They got as muddy and dirty as we did by and large, and they didn't wear any insignias, and if you threw a bedroll down in a room where you got or a barn to sleep, why, they were right there with you. And the same with all the rank. You know, there wasn't that big a deal as far as rank's concerned. You were all pretty common. So, and there's 2 or 3 more good friends upstairs that one in particular that he was in that little group of 12 that I was with that I mentioned, you know, and he's. So we had a pretty good feeling, and over the years we've kept a pretty good. Well, we go to most of these reunions, and so we kind of keep in touch that way.
What did you learn about yourself during World War II?
Well, I really don't think that I learned that much, because I was just brought up to be as self-sufficient as I could be and not depend upon anybody else or not rely on anybody else too much. Just kind of well, I've got a lot of good friends, but what I mean to depend upon somebody to do something or think for you, why, I just was taught to do it on my own, and I think that's why I got by better maybe than a lot of people. And a lot of people had the idea, oh, you couldn't talk about the war, it's supposed to give you a bad feeling. Your mind isn't made to do that. You don't have to be brainwashed to think you have to do or think some way, so I just done my own thing, I guess.
Do you think most of the men in the reconnaissance were men like you? They had to be pretty self-sufficient and self-starters, just...
Well, I think that's true in a lot of cases. I'm sure in maybe some of your bigger groups, there was a lot of course, leaders maybe, but there was a lot of just plain old followers that done just what they had to do, and they didn't do it because they wanted to. Now that isn't true of all naturally, but I think in a lot of that's true. That the smaller the group, I really think the more thinkers or self-sufficient people there were. I think anyway. Maybe if you had somebody from another big infantry out, they wouldn't agree, but anyway, that's my thoughts.
What is, you told us a few stories, but is there, sometimes, you know, when you see things, it's sort of like your mind takes a picture or you experience something. Are there any of those things that they're just like snapshots in your mind when you think about your experiences?
Yes, there are just several, I suppose. One of them, I guess, is I can see it just as plain. I can almost tell the grin on this guy's face. He was flying a Messerschmitt.
A what?
A Messerschmitt, a German plane, one of his fighter plane, and it was a beautiful sunshiny day, and we'd been having trouble. I think we tried to get through this little village in high hills and sort of mountainous or wild hills in southern Germany. And I was in a Jeep, and I had my little stove out heating up some water. I was going to have a cup of something. We were just waiting on some radio to come through so we could advance someplace, because you never really knew where you was going to go. But anyway, there's a big valley and then this high, sharp hill. And we're on the side of this hill on a little road. And I'm there in the Jeep, and right behind me is an armored car. Just, 25, 30 feet maybe, or a little further. And one of the fellows is laying on there in the sun, on top of this armored car. And I'm squatted down beside that little stove, and I look up, and here comes this Messerschmitt. He had his engine shut clear down, and he would just come in gliding, and he picked out the biggest target, which was the armored car. And I'll swear that guy, I could see him just like I'm looking at you, with these goggles on and everything, and he's just looking at me, and he just hits his machine guns, and it hits this armored car. But it don't hurt anybody, really. He flattens the tires, and the guy on top of this armored car, he had his bedroll, and it just looked like a bunch of rats that got in there and chewed it all up. And then this guy just turned the engine on, and away he went. He never came back. We was all ready when but I guess I can see that guy is so plain but it's just things like that just stick in your mind. You don't really worry about it, I guess. It just happened, and I was lucky, so. But that's just some of the things but another thing, I guess, that sticks in my mind was how the people survived and got by we were right on the French border. And we booby-trapped everything around, and then we taught these people, they were French, for a place to not sleep in a ground or barn, and they had a big room. When you walked in the door, this side was their house, basically, but this one room was in the front of the house, and it was empty. And then the next door was the walk to the cow barn. Well, he said, this Frenchman said, just throw your bedrolls out on this floor, and you can sleep here high and dry and whatever, and take our turns at patrols and whatever. And after the second day, he said, come with me. So he goes to the cow barn, which was right the next wall from the room we're in. And he had this manger where the hay for the cows, threw the hay in there. And then they have, in your older barns, you had a little box raised up out of the hay, and there they put the grain, like oats or corn or whatever. And he raised the lid of this up, and there was a ladder that went down underneath the barn. And so I got down in there, and there was a room dug underneath that room where we were sleeping. It was about this high. There was mattresses and straw. And he said that sometimes, he said there were 6 flyers down in there when the Germans were sleeping in that very room where we were sleeping. They were part of the underground to get the downed flyers back to England. But he said they almost always had flyers down in there. He said as high as 6. Sometimes it'd be just 1. Then they'd let food down to them, and they'd sleep down there in that dugout place underneath the house. But it's just things like that, I guess, that made it, that you remember, I guess, more so than some of the other, the dirt and the dust and whatever. But now, so I took all that in and remembered it all and enjoyed it, I guess. you got to say I enjoyed it, if you can, a deal like that, because I just lived one moment at a time and enjoyed everything I done. So it was, made it back all right, so had a good life since.
What did you do when you came back? Did you go back to the farm?
No. Why I don't, well, I guess I had two reasons. Farmers back then, that's all you did was work. Like when I was going to high school, and I didn't begrudge my folks that I worked out in the fields and where the other kids in high school, they were playing this and playing that. I did get to play baseball, but that wasn't a nightly activity because you didn't have night baseball games or anything like that back then. But, and I guess I just thought, well, I needed a different life. So I got a job in a foundry. And I worked there for about a year, and then I got a job with John Deere in a foundry. And so I ended up with them for 37 years. And I retired 15 and a half years ago. So, and they gave me enough pension so I could have clean clothes once in a while and eat. So anyway, that's where I came from.
I wanted to ask you, let's get back to Europe for a minute. Where were you when you found out the war was over, and how did you find out?
Well, we had just pulled back. I can't tell you exact the towns or anything, but I think the day before that, or that very day, they had us go back, which they done once in a while for regrouping, ammunition, take care of our vehicles, whatever. But anyway, we came back. They said, well, we were going back to such and such a spot, and stopped there, which was just a little village. And so then I know there was, well, this one real good friend of mine, him and I and another fella, we got to talking and whatever. And like I say, that we got into some wine, and but one of the guys on the armored car, one of the armored cars, said that he'd heard the war was going to be over. So that night, when we heard that, that's when we all got into drinking some wine and whatever, you know. But it was, I can't tell you the name of the little village, but it was just a good feeling to know that. And then, of course, everybody said, well, what do we do now? You know, what happened now? So, and then there really wasn't that much celebrating, I guess, in our little bunch. We just had our wine and partied a little bit, you know, just amongst ourselves, and that was it. We were just glad it was done, I guess. But of course, then you'd live with the thought, well, where do you go now? What happened now? You know, but because there was talk, you know, that we'd be shipped to Japan, you know, that direction. But then that was a further thought from our mind, really, because that was too quick to even think about anything like that. So.
What did happen to you after the war ended, and did you have enough points to come home? Or?
Yes, I had more points than well, what we did, we were assigned to an area, and what you were to do was, we had 13 little villages, and our job at that time was, like, I would go in a Jeep with a couple other guys, and our job was to go, and I'd talk to the Burgermeister, the mayor of these little villages, and he was supposed to tell us if there was any weapons, any army vehicles, any ex or German soldiers hiding out, or anything to this effect. And then we'd go every so many days to different villages, and I would endeavor to talk to somebody like that, see. And there was very little, but it was more just a show of, hey, we're still here, don't get sloppy about what you're going to do. So, and then that lasted for quite some time, and then I was transferred out of this bunch to another group which was the 1st Armored, because I had more points than a lot of the rest of them. And then I stayed there with that group, just knocking around, not very long, and then I went to a, well, they called them Lucky, or Camel, or I mean, cigarette. Mine was Lucky Strike. They had a bunch of these where they sent them from there back to the States. And I left up at Brussels, Belgium, is where I guess it was.
Were you glad to get home?
Oh, yeah.
It was
Yeah.
good. Well, have I left out anything? Is there some area that I have not covered that you can think that you need to tell me about?
Well, basically, I can't think of anything that comes to my mind right at the moment but I guess the whole thing is, the Army is a bad thing, but it's how you make it. But that's true with anything in life. If you don't accept and do what you want to do, or why, and I was that way. That's the way I felt about the Army. I didn't like it, but I can't say I disliked it, because I just accepted what was going to happen and made the best of it, and said that's good enough. So I think that's kind of what's happened all my life. I think is just I've just done that and been fortunate to have, I think, good health, and I got 2 good kids. So, and my wife and I have been married for, my gracious, 53 years, 54 years.
What is her name?
Carol. Yep. So, and we live out in the country. We've got an old place out in the country that just hills and hollows. If you laid it down flat, I'd have twice as much. So we just kind of live a pretty good life, I guess.
Well, I appreciate you coming and talking to us.
Well, it's been good, so.
It's you've given me a different view of the reconnaissance area, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to help.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's